The fastest lie is the one that begins after the first 10 seconds because almost nobody asks what happened before the camera started recording. On a warm Thursday afternoon just after 3:20 p.m., the outdoor shopping plaza in downtown Columbus, Ohio, was filled with families carrying shopping bags, teenagers laughing outside coffee shops, and office workers enjoying the last hour before heading home. Nothing about the afternoon suggested that within minutes hundreds of strangers would believe they already knew the truth. White veteran police officer Daniel Hayes had worn a badge for nearly 28 years, and experience had taught him that calm voices solved more problems than loud ones. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his body camera had been recording since the beginning of his shift, and every decision he made followed the same principle that had guided his entire career. Slow down. Observe everything. Decide only after the facts arrive. A routine call from dispatch directed him toward the center of the plaza after a store employee reported an unusual disagreement involving a customer and missing merchandise. By the time Daniel arrived, several employees stood near the entrance of a department store, while curious shoppers had already begun gathering nearby. Standing a few feet away was Marcus Reed, a well-dressed black businessman in his early 40s carrying 2 shopping bags and a leather briefcase. Marcus looked composed rather than angry. He answered every question politely, kept both hands visible, and never once raised his voice. Daniel greeted him respectfully before asking if they could take a moment to understand exactly what had happened. Marcus agreed immediately. The conversation remained professional, measured, and surprisingly calm. Yet the growing crowd did not hear everything that had been said from the beginning. More people arrived every minute. Some noticed only that a white police officer was speaking with a black man, while store employees watched from nearby. Within moments, several smartphones appeared above the crowd. Camera lenses pointed toward Daniel from different angles. Short video clips began recording without anyone asking how long the conversation had already been taking place. One woman quietly whispered that something did not look right. Another man stepped closer, believing he might be witnessing misconduct. Daniel noticed the phones, but refused to let them change his behavior. His attention remained on Marcus, who continued answering questions with remarkable patience. Then a store manager approached carrying printed transaction records that seemed to create even more confusion instead of resolving it. Daniel carefully reviewed the documents while Marcus calmly explained that he had purchased every item legally only minutes earlier. The receipts appeared authentic. The merchandise matched the bags. Yet one electronic inventory alert still remained unresolved inside the store's security system. Daniel chose not to rush. He asked everyone to remain patient while additional information was verified. Minutes slowly passed. 5 became 8. 8 became 12. The growing audience interpreted silence as guilt, although nobody agreed on whose guilt they believed they were witnessing. Daniel never argued with the crowd. Marcus never demanded special treatment. Both men waited for evidence instead of assumptions. Unknown to everyone standing around them, 3 separate police body cameras had quietly recorded every second since the first officer arrived. None of the people lifting their phones realized that the most important camera was not the one in their hands, and before 15 minutes had passed, one forgotten recording would challenge everything they believed they had just seen. By the time the clock above the shopping plaza reached exactly 3:35 p.m., the atmosphere had changed far more than the people standing there realized. What had begun as a quiet conversation between a veteran police officer and a cooperative customer had slowly transformed into a public spectacle driven by fragments instead of facts. More smartphones appeared with every passing minute. Some people stood on benches to record a better angle. Others whispered their own explanations to friends who had arrived long after the original conversation had begun. Within moments, those whispered assumptions sounded more convincing than the truth because they were repeated more often. Daniel Hayes remained exactly where he had been from the beginning, maintaining a calm posture while carefully reviewing the information available to him. He never raised his voice. He never interrupted Marcus Reed. He simply continued asking measured questions that any experienced officer would ask during a routine investigation. Marcus answered each one respectfully, explaining where he had entered the store, which register he had used, and how he had paid for every item inside his shopping bags. He even produced printed receipts along with the digital receipt stored on his phone. Everything appeared consistent except for one unresolved inventory notification that remained active inside the department store's security system. The store manager admitted that employees could not explain why the alert had not cleared after the purchase. Daniel looked from the receipts to the merchandise and then back toward the manager. Until we understand why the system still shows an active alert, nobody should make assumptions, he said calmly. Marcus nodded in agreement. I am willing to wait, he replied. I would rather everyone know the truth than rush to the wrong conclusion. Unfortunately, not everyone nearby shared that patience. A young man holding his phone several yards away uploaded a short video that began only after Daniel had already been speaking with Marcus for several minutes. The clip showed a white police officer standing in front of a black man, while several store employees watched nearby. It contained none of the respectful conversation that had happened earlier and none of the explanations Marcus had already provided. Within minutes, the clip spread across local social media pages, accompanied by captions written by people who had never spoken to either man. More bystanders arrived after seeing the growing crowd, believing they had missed an important confrontation. Daniel became aware that people were discussing him without knowing what had happened before their cameras started recording, yet he refused to respond to the growing noise around him. Nearly 28 years in law enforcement had taught him that defending himself before the facts were complete would only distract from the investigation itself. Marcus noticed the attention as well. One woman quietly approached him and asked whether he wanted to make a public statement. Marcus gently shook his head. Not yet, he answered. Everybody deserves the complete story before anybody chooses a side. His response surprised several people standing nearby because it was the opposite of what they expected. Instead of encouraging division, he encouraged patience. Just then, another responding officer arrived and quietly informed Daniel that 2 department body cameras had already been logged into the evidence system from the scene. Daniel acknowledged the update before asking one simple question. Has every responding officer uploaded their recording? The answer came after a brief pause. Not yet, Sergeant. One camera has not synchronized. Daniel looked toward Marcus for a moment, and neither man said another word. Both seemed to understand something the growing crowd did not. Sometimes the smallest missing piece is the one that changes the entire picture. The unanswered question about the missing body camera recording lingered quietly in Daniel Hayes's mind even as the shopping plaza grew louder around him. He had learned long ago that investigations were often shaped as much by what people could not see as by what stood directly in front of them. Around the entrance of the department store, the crowd continued to grow. Some shoppers had paused only because they noticed other people watching. Others arrived after seeing short video clips spreading across their phones. Each new arrival brought another opinion, another assumption, and another version of a story that had already begun changing before the evidence had finished speaking. Daniel glanced once toward Marcus Reed, who remained remarkably composed despite becoming the center of unwanted attention. Marcus stood with both shopping bags resting beside his feet while his leather briefcase remained closed. His expression reflected patience rather than frustration. Every few minutes, someone attempted to ask him whether he planned to accuse the officer of treating him unfairly. Each time he answered with nearly the same words. I would rather wait for the complete record than speak from an incomplete one. Those responses surprised many people because they expected emotion instead of restraint. Inside the department store, the manager continued working with the inventory department to understand why the electronic alert had remained active even though the purchase records appeared accurate. A cashier soon arrived carrying duplicate receipts printed directly from the register. They matched the copies Marcus had already presented. Daniel carefully compared every transaction number, purchase time, payment authorization, and listed item. Nothing suggested dishonesty. Yet the unresolved alert still remained active inside the security software. Daniel quietly requested assistance from the store's technical support team before making any further decision. He refused to allow uncertainty to become suspicion. Nearby, another responding officer approached after speaking with dispatch. Sergeant, the evidence technician confirmed that 2 body camera recordings have already been uploaded. They both begin after you arrived at the scene. Daniel nodded thoughtfully before asking the same question once more. And the third? The officer looked briefly at his tablet before answering. Still unavailable. The synchronization never completed. Daniel simply replied, Do not close anything until every recording is accounted for. Marcus overheard the conversation and offered a small, respectful nod. It was clear that both men understood the importance of waiting, even if the growing crowd did not. Several people continued recording from different angles, unaware that every phone captured only a narrow piece of a much larger moment. A local online news page had already reposted one of the short clips, and comments multiplied faster than verified information. Some viewers praised Marcus without knowing his full statement. Others criticized Daniel without hearing a single complete conversation. Neither reaction reflected the facts already sitting inside store records or the evidence still waiting to be recovered. 15 minutes had now passed since the first cameras pointed toward the scene. To many observers, those 15 minutes felt like the entire story. To Daniel, they represented only one chapter. To Marcus, they represented a reminder that public opinion often moves much faster than the truth. As afternoon sunlight stretched across the shopping plaza and reflected against the glass storefronts, an evidence technician finally stepped out of a marked department vehicle carrying a secure digital equipment case. He walked directly toward Daniel with a calm expression before speaking quietly enough that only the officers could hear. "Sergeant, we found the missing device. Body camera 3 never failed. It was never uploaded because it was still recording." The evidence technician's quiet announcement immediately changed the direction of the investigation, although nothing about the atmosphere outside the department store suggested that yet. Around the shopping plaza, people continued recording with their phones, convinced they had already witnessed everything worth seeing. Conversations moved faster than verified information. Some bystanders confidently described events to friends who had arrived only moments earlier, while others refreshed social media feeds where short clips continued collecting thousands of views. Daniel Hayes listened carefully as the technician explained that body camera 3 had remained active because the responding officer had never ended the recording after arriving at the scene. Instead of uploading automatically, the device had continued capturing everything that happened from the earliest moments of the call until the present. Daniel looked toward Marcus Reed before speaking. "Then we wait," he said calmly. Marcus answered with a simple nod. That has been the right decision from the beginning. Neither man appeared interested in winning an argument. Both were interested only in allowing the complete record to exist before anyone reached a conclusion. Inside the department store, technicians finally completed a review of the inventory system and discovered that a delayed synchronization between two separate databases had prevented one purchased item from being cleared automatically. The transaction itself had been valid from the moment Marcus completed his purchase. The electronic alert had remained active because the software had failed to update correctly. The store manager quietly admitted the problem to Daniel and immediately contacted corporate technical support to document the error. Daniel thanked the manager for confirming the information, but reminded everyone that the investigation would still remain open until every available recording had been reviewed. He understood that accurate procedures protected everyone equally, including the customer, the store employees, and the responding officers. Nearby, the evidence technician carefully removed the recording device from its secure case and connected it to a protected department laptop inside a marked police vehicle parked along the edge of the plaza. Several officers gathered quietly while maintaining a respectful distance from the growing crowd. Daniel deliberately chose not to watch the recording in public. He wanted every step handled according to department policy so that no one could later question the integrity of the evidence. Marcus remained nearby, calmly answering only one repeated question from curious bystanders. "Have you already seen the recording?" Each time he replied with the same steady voice. "No, I am waiting just like everyone else." His patience continued surprising people who expected anger or public accusations. Nearly everyone holding a phone seemed convinced that immediate opinions mattered more than complete information. Yet Marcus refused to encourage that belief. Several minutes later, the evidence technician stepped back outside the vehicle and approached Daniel with quiet confidence. "Sergeant, the recording begins before dispatch even notified the first responding unit," he explained. "It captures the entire sequence from the initial contact inside the store through everything that followed outside." Daniel asked only one question. "Is the recording complete?" The technician answered without hesitation. Every second, Daniel took a slow breath before looking across the crowd that still surrounded the plaza. 15 minutes of public judgment had already passed. Thousands of online viewers believed they had watched the whole story. They had not seen the beginning. They had not heard every conversation, and they had not known one camera had been recording long before anyone lifted a phone. Within the next few minutes, the forgotten recording would begin showing a version of events that nobody outside the investigation expected, because sometimes the truth does not arrive with louder voices. Sometimes it arrives with a complete timeline. The protected review room inside the Columbus Police Department remained almost completely silent as the evidence technician loaded the final recording into the secure evidence system. Daniel Hayes stood beside the monitor with the same calm expression he had maintained throughout the afternoon, while Marcus Reed waited nearby without saying a word. Neither man appeared interested in proving himself correct. They simply wanted the complete record to replace the incomplete story that had already traveled across countless phones. The technician verified the digital evidence seal, confirmed the recording had remained unaltered from the moment it was captured, and pressed play. The screen immediately revealed something nobody outside the investigation had seen. Nearly 12 minutes before the first smartphone had started recording, another officer had entered the department store after a store employee reported that an electronic inventory alert continued appearing even after a completed purchase. The recording showed Marcus calmly standing beside the customer service counter while voluntarily presenting both printed receipts and digital payment confirmation without being asked twice. He answered every question respectfully, smiled politely at employees attempting to understand the computer error, and even suggested that the problem might simply be a delayed system update, because he had experienced similar issues with another retailer months earlier. The recording then showed Daniel arriving several minutes later after dispatch requested an additional responding officer to assist with documentation. Rather than immediately questioning Marcus, Daniel first spoke privately with the store manager, reviewed available receipts, compared transaction numbers, and instructed employees not to make assumptions until every piece of information had been verified. His voice remained steady throughout the conversation. At no point did he accuse Marcus of wrongdoing. Instead, he repeatedly reminded everyone that an active electronic alert alone did not prove anything without supporting evidence. The footage continued exactly as Daniel remembered it. Marcus cooperated willingly, opened every shopping bag only after Daniel explained the reason, and thanked the officers for handling the situation professionally despite the inconvenience. Even more importantly, the recording captured something no public video included. Before either man stepped outside the store, Daniel quietly apologized for the unexpected delay and assured Marcus that verifying facts protected honest customers just as much as it protected businesses. Marcus responded with a calm smile and replied, "I appreciate you taking the time to get it right instead of getting it fast." Several officers inside the review room exchanged thoughtful glances as the recording continued. The timeline moved naturally from the calm discussion inside the store to the growing crowd outside, where smartphone recordings finally began. Suddenly, the missing pieces fell perfectly into place. Every clip shared online had started after the respectful conversations had already taken place. Viewers had seen only the final portion of a much longer interaction, while unknowingly missing the very moments that explained everything. The evidence technician stopped the recording after confirming every file had been securely archived. No one celebrated. No one criticized the crowd waiting outside. Daniel simply looked toward Marcus and quietly said, "Thank you for your patience." Marcus smiled with the same quiet dignity he had carried since the beginning of the afternoon. "The truth was always there," he answered. "It only needed enough time for everyone else to catch up." Outside the review room, thousands of people still believed they had already watched the complete story. Inside, one uninterrupted recording had just reminded everyone present that evidence does not become more powerful because it speaks loudly. It becomes powerful because it tells the entire truth from the very beginning. By the following morning, the complete body camera timeline had been reviewed, verified, and formally documented according to department policy. But outside the police station, the public conversation was only beginning to change. The Columbus Police Department released a statement confirming that the investigation had been completed using every available source of evidence, including the previously unavailable third body camera recording. Rather than offering dramatic conclusions, The statement simply explained that the full sequence of events showed a routine investigation handled through established procedures, while a technical inventory error inside the department store created unnecessary confusion. Hours later, the complete timeline was released alongside the original smartphone clips that had spread across social media the previous afternoon. For the first time, viewers could watch the interaction from the beginning instead of entering the story halfway through. They saw Marcus Reed voluntarily presenting his receipts before anyone requested them. They watched Daniel Hayes carefully compare transaction records instead of making assumptions. They heard Daniel remind store employees that an unresolved electronic alert was not proof of wrongdoing and that every customer deserved a fair review before conclusions were reached. They also heard the quiet apology Daniel offered Marcus for the inconvenience long before the crowd outside had begun recording. The reaction was immediate, although very different from the one that had unfolded the previous day. Many people admitted they had reached conclusions after watching only a few seconds of video. Others acknowledged that the missing context had completely changed their understanding of what actually happened. Local journalists updated their reports to include the complete timeline, emphasizing that the electronic inventory system had failed to clear a legitimate purchase because of a delayed database synchronization rather than any action by Marcus. The department store publicly apologized for the software failure and announced additional technical safeguards to reduce the possibility of similar errors in the future. Marcus accepted the apology with quiet grace, explaining that honest mistakes could become valuable lessons when organizations chose transparency instead of excuses. Daniel never held a press conference celebrating the outcome. He returned to his regular patrol assignment as he had done thousands of times throughout his career, believing that the evidence had already spoken more clearly than any interview ever could. Before leaving headquarters that afternoon, he crossed paths with Marcus one final time in the lobby. There were no television cameras waiting, no crowd gathering nearby, and no audience expecting dramatic words. Daniel extended his hand with sincere respect. Marcus accepted it without hesitation. "Thank you for trusting the process," Daniel said. Marcus smiled warmly before answering. "Thank you for protecting the process." They understood that neither of them had truly won anything that day. The real victory belonged to patience, professionalism, and the willingness to let complete evidence replace incomplete assumptions. As Daniel walked toward the parking lot, he looked once at the body camera secured to the front of his uniform. For nearly 3 decades, it had quietly documented ordinary moments that rarely attracted attention. On this occasion, one forgotten recording had preserved something far more important than a single investigation. It had preserved trust before it could disappear completely. Sometimes justice does not arrive through louder voices, faster headlines, or stronger opinions. Sometimes justice arrives one complete frame at a time, reminding everyone that the truth has never been afraid to wait because the truth always remembers what the world forgets. 3 months later, the afternoon at the shopping plaza had quietly become more than a closed investigation. It had become a lesson repeated inside classrooms, conference rooms, and police training sessions across the city. The Columbus Police Department selected the complete body camera timeline as part of a new professional development program focused on evidence, public perception, and communication during high-visibility incidents. Veteran officers, newly graduated recruits, supervisors, and civilian staff gathered inside the department training auditorium where every recording was presented from beginning to end without interruption. The instructors deliberately showed the shortened smartphone clips first. Around the room, many participants reached immediate conclusions after watching only those brief recordings. Some believed the officer had acted too cautiously. Others believed the customer had been treated unfairly. A few admitted they already felt confident enough to explain the entire situation after less than 30 seconds of video. Then the instructor quietly restarted the presentation using the complete body camera timeline. As the recording unfolded, expressions across the room slowly changed. The respectful conversation inside the store appeared first. The careful review of receipts followed. The technical inventory error became visible. Daniel Hayes apologized for the inconvenience before anyone outside had started recording. Marcus Reed thanked him for taking the time to verify every fact instead of rushing toward a conclusion. When the presentation ended, the room remained silent for several moments. The lesson had become obvious without anyone needing to explain it. Later that afternoon, Daniel accepted an invitation to answer questions from the new recruits. He did not describe himself as a hero, nor did he criticize the crowd that had misunderstood the situation. Instead, he spoke quietly about responsibility. Every person carrying a camera records something valuable, he said. But no single camera always records everything. Your responsibility is not to defend your reputation. Your responsibility is to protect the truth until the complete evidence exists. His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of nearly 3 decades spent serving the community. Marcus also attended the session at the department's invitation. Standing beside Daniel, he shared his own perspective. Patience is difficult when people already think they know your story, he told the audience. But if you believe the truth exists, you have to give it enough time to arrive. Several recruits later admitted that hearing both men speak together had challenged many assumptions they had carried into the profession. They expected conflict. Instead, they witnessed mutual respect built through honesty and professionalism. The department soon incorporated the case into future ethics instruction, emphasizing that public trust depends not only on correct decisions, but also on the willingness to wait until every fact has been examined. Outside the academy, the department store completed a major software update that permanently corrected the inventory synchronization problem responsible for the original confusion. Employees received additional training on communicating technical issues before requesting law enforcement assistance. Marcus continued leading his business with the same quiet confidence he had shown throughout the investigation. Daniel returned each morning to ordinary patrol assignments, understanding that most successful days would never appear on the evening news. Yet every time he secured his body camera before beginning another shift, he remembered that one forgotten recording had done more than protect an officer or confirm a customer's honesty. It had reminded an entire community that justice is strongest when it refuses to hurry, because the truth never asks to be believed first. It asks only to be heard completely. Nearly 1 year passed before Daniel Hayes and Marcus Reed unexpectedly crossed paths again, and this time there were no flashing phone screens, no confused crowd gathering around them, and no unfinished story waiting for evidence. The annual Community Partnership Fair filled the Columbus Civic Center with local businesses, neighborhood organizations, schools, and public safety agencies working together to strengthen trust across the city. Children explored emergency vehicles parked outside, while families spoke with firefighters, medical teams, and police officers inside the exhibition hall. Daniel volunteered at the department's community outreach booth, answering questions from parents and encouraging young visitors to learn about public service. Marcus attended as the owner of a growing technology consulting company that had recently partnered with several nonprofit organizations to improve digital access for students. Their reunion happened naturally when Marcus noticed Daniel helping a young boy climb into a patrol vehicle for a photograph. Daniel turned, recognized Marcus immediately, and greeted him with the same quiet professionalism that had defined their first meeting. They shook hands with genuine warmth, no longer connected by an investigation, but by a shared understanding of what patience and integrity could accomplish. Throughout the afternoon, several visitors recognized both men from news coverage that had followed the shopping plaza incident months earlier. Instead of asking dramatic questions, they expressed appreciation for the example both had set by allowing evidence and respect to guide the outcome. A local high school teacher approached them with several students and explained that the complete body camera timeline had become part of a classroom discussion about critical thinking, responsible citizenship, and the danger of judging situations before gathering complete information. One student admitted that he had originally watched only the short online clips and believed he understood everything. After seeing the full recording, he realized how easily incomplete information could shape confident but inaccurate opinions. Daniel smiled thoughtfully before replying, "The hardest part of serving the public is accepting that people will sometimes see only one moment of your day. Your responsibility is to make sure every moment can stand beside the next when the whole story is finally told." Marcus added his own perspective with quiet sincerity. The same lesson applies to every person, not only police officers. We all deserve the chance to be understood through the complete picture instead of a single frame. Their conversation drew the attention of dozens of visitors who remained to listen, not because anyone demanded applause but because the message felt honest. Nearby, representatives from the department store that had experienced the inventory software failure shared how they had completely redesigned their verification procedures, reducing technical errors while improving communication with customers. What had once been an embarrassing mistake had become an opportunity for lasting improvement. As the event came to an end and families slowly walked toward the parking lot beneath the soft evening sunlight, Daniel and Marcus paused outside the Civic Center entrance for one final conversation. Neither man spoke about blame or reputation. Instead, they reflected on how easily fear and assumption can outrun the facts if people allow emotion to replace patience. Before leaving, Marcus looked toward the busy street where strangers continued living ordinary lives without realizing how much one forgotten recording had changed. "Truth has remarkable timing," he said quietly. Daniel nodded before answering. "It arrives exactly when people are finally willing to see every piece instead of only the part that confirms what they already believe." Together they walked in different directions, carrying the same lesson into different lives, proving that genuine trust is never built by winning an argument. It is built by allowing honesty, dignity, and complete evidence to speak long after the noise has faded away. As the months continued to pass, the story quietly expanded beyond Columbus and reached law enforcement agencies, universities, and community organizations across Ohio. What had once appeared to be an ordinary misunderstanding caused by a technical inventory error had gradually become a practical example of how incomplete information could influence public opinion long before verified evidence had an opportunity to speak. Daniel Hayes never expected his routine response to become part of professional discussions, yet invitations continued arriving from departments interested in strengthening trust between officers and the communities they served. Whenever possible, Daniel accepted those invitations, not because he enjoyed public attention, but because he believed every lesson earned through experience should be shared with those still beginning their careers. During one regional leadership seminar attended by police supervisors, emergency dispatch professionals, and civic leaders, Daniel stood before the audience holding nothing more than a small notebook containing observations gathered over nearly 3 decades of service. He did not begin with statistics or department policies. Instead, he asked the audience to imagine making a decision after watching only 15 seconds of a 2-hour movie. Quiet smiles appeared throughout the room because everyone immediately understood how unreasonable that would be. Daniel then explained that investigations often faced exactly the same challenge. People naturally formed opinions from the first images they received, while the remaining details quietly waited to be discovered. Marcus Reed attended the seminar as well after receiving an invitation from the organizing committee. Sitting beside educators, business owners, and nonprofit leaders, he listened as Daniel described the importance of preserving evidence without allowing outside pressure to influence professional judgment. When it became Marcus's turn to speak, he reflected on the experience from a citizen's perspective. He explained that remaining patient had not always been easy because he understood how quickly public assumptions could shape someone's reputation. Even so, he believed reacting emotionally before the facts were complete would only have created additional confusion. His message resonated throughout the auditorium. "Respect grows strongest when both sides choose truth over speed," he said. "Trust is not built because people agree immediately. Trust grows because people remain committed to the facts even when waiting feels uncomfortable." After the seminar concluded, several young officers approached Daniel and Marcus together. One recruit admitted that before joining the academy, he often believed viral videos always showed the complete truth. Another student studying criminal justice explained that watching the full body camera timeline had changed how she evaluated information shared online. Daniel encouraged them to continue asking thoughtful questions before reaching permanent conclusions. Marcus reminded them that every individual deserves to be seen as a complete person instead of a single moment captured on a screen. Their advice spread naturally beyond the seminar through conversations inside classrooms, community meetings, and neighborhood organizations. Gradually, the lesson became less about one officer or one customer and more about the responsibility every citizen carries when deciding what to believe and what to share. Before leaving the conference center that evening, Daniel and Marcus paused near the entrance overlooking the city skyline as the setting sun reflected across the windows of nearby buildings. Neither man spoke about recognition or personal achievement. They simply appreciated that an afternoon once defined by misunderstanding had become an opportunity to encourage patience, fairness, and thoughtful judgment. Sometimes the strongest bridge between people is not built by proving who is right. It is built when everyone becomes willing to wait until every piece of the truth finally stands together. 2 years after the afternoon that quietly changed so many perspectives, Daniel Hayes found himself standing before the largest class of police recruits the Columbus Police Department had welcomed in more than a decade. Retirement was finally beginning to appear somewhere beyond the horizon, yet his commitment to teaching had become as important as his years on patrol. The academy classroom was filled with eager faces, fresh uniforms, and notebooks waiting to capture lessons that could never be learned from policy manuals alone. Instead of beginning with criminal statutes or departmental procedures, Daniel walked to the front of the room carrying a small evidence drive. He placed it gently on the instructor's desk before looking across the class. "Every decision you make will eventually become part of someone's story," he said calmly. "Make certain the complete story reflects your character." The room grew silent as he played the familiar body camera recording from beginning to end. Unlike previous presentations, the recruits already knew the outcome before watching the footage. Even so, many admitted afterward that they still felt themselves reaching quick conclusions during the first few minutes before reminding themselves to wait for the remaining evidence. Daniel smiled when he heard their honest reflections because that instinct was exactly what he wanted them to recognize. He explained that experience could strengthen judgment, but it could also create dangerous confidence if officers forgot that every situation deserved fresh attention. Marcus Reed accepted another invitation to join the discussion later that afternoon. The recruits welcomed him warmly, already familiar with his role in the case study that had become part of academy instruction. Standing beside Daniel, Marcus spoke less about the investigation itself and more about the responsibility carried by ordinary citizens. He explained that trust could not survive unless both public servants and community members remained willing to listen before deciding. One recruit asked what had impressed him most about Daniel during their first meeting. Marcus answered without hesitation, "He never treated me like a conclusion. He treated me like a person whose situation deserved to be understood." Daniel looked down briefly, humbled by words he had never expected to hear repeated years later. Another recruit asked Daniel whether he had ever felt tempted to defend himself publicly while the short videos spread online. Daniel answered thoughtfully, "If I had argued with every opinion before the evidence was complete, I would have become part of the noise instead of protecting the facts. Your reputation should never become more important than your responsibility." The lesson stayed with the recruits long after the session ended. Several instructors later observed that discussions inside the academy had become noticeably different. Students challenged one another to gather more information before offering opinions during practical exercises. Scenario training emphasized careful observation instead of rapid assumptions. Even classroom debates reflected greater patience because everyone understood how easily incomplete information could mislead confident people. As the academy lights dimmed that evening and the last recruits walked toward the parking lot carrying their training materials, Daniel remained alone inside the classroom for a few quiet moments. He looked once more at the evidence drive resting on the desk before placing it carefully back into his pocket. It contained no dramatic rescue, no extraordinary confrontation, and no unforgettable speech. It contained something far more valuable. It preserved the simple reminder that professionalism is measured not by how quickly someone reaches a conclusion, but by the discipline to wait until every fact has finally found its proper place. Several months later, Daniel Hayes received a handwritten envelope that stood apart from the routine reports and departmental correspondence waiting on his desk each morning. The paper was simple, the handwriting careful, and the return address belonged to a public high school just outside Columbus. Curious, Daniel opened the letter before beginning his shift. Inside, a history teacher explained that her students had recently completed a project examining how incomplete information influences public opinion. Rather than relying on fictional examples, the class had studied the complete timeline of the department store incident because it demonstrated how easily a few recorded moments could overshadow an entire sequence of verified facts. Attached to the teacher's note were handwritten reflections from several students. One wrote that he had learned the difference between watching an event and understanding it. Another admitted that before the assignment, he believed the first version of every story was usually the correct one. A third student described how the complete body camera recording had changed the way she approached conversations with friends and family, encouraging her to ask more questions before reaching conclusions. Daniel read every page slowly, recognizing that the most meaningful outcomes of public service often appeared long after an investigation had officially ended. Later that week, he contacted Marcus Reed and asked whether he would be willing to visit the school together. Marcus accepted immediately. On a bright Friday morning, they arrived at the classroom where the students greeted them with respectful curiosity rather than excitement. The teacher explained that many of the students had spent days discussing how assumptions formed and why patients often disappeared when information traveled quickly. Daniel answered their questions honestly, describing how years of experience had taught him that remaining calm during uncertainty required discipline that was often invisible to the public. He explained that wearing a badge never guaranteed instant trust. Trust had to be earned through consistency, fairness, and the willingness to let evidence guide every decision. Marcus then shared his own experience, telling the students that patience had not meant ignoring the situation. It had meant believing that complete facts would eventually speak more clearly than immediate reactions. One student raised his hand and asked whether either of them ever became frustrated while waiting for the missing recording to be recovered. Daniel smiled gently before answering that every investigation contains moments of uncertainty, but allowing frustration to replace professionalism only creates additional problems. Marcus added that confidence in the truth sometimes requires quiet endurance because the truth rarely competes with rumors by moving faster. It succeeds by remaining accurate. Before leaving, the teacher presented Daniel and Marcus with a framed collection of anonymous student reflections. At the bottom of the display, one sentence appeared in larger letters than the others. It read, "The complete story deserves the same attention as the first impression." Daniel looked at the words for several seconds before thanking the class. As he and Marcus walked toward the school parking lot beneath a clear autumn sky, neither spoke immediately. They simply appreciated that an afternoon once remembered for misunderstanding had now become part of classrooms where future voters, business leaders, teachers, and public servants were learning to value fairness over haste. The forgotten body camera had preserved more than evidence. It had preserved an opportunity for an entire generation to discover that wisdom begins the moment people become willing to replace certainty with understanding, because truth has never needed people to find it quickly. It has only needed people to care enough to find it completely. By the time Daniel Hayes officially announced his retirement after 30 years of service, the department auditorium was filled with fellow officers, civilian employees, community leaders, teachers, business owners, and many of the people whose lives had quietly intersected with his own over the decades. There was no dramatic ceremony, no celebration built around a single investigation, and no attempt to elevate one afternoon above an entire career. Instead, those gathered came to honor a man whose greatest strength had always been the patience to place truth above personal recognition. Marcus Reed accepted the invitation to attend without hesitation. As he entered the auditorium, he noticed photographs displayed along the walls showing Daniel working with neighborhood schools, assisting community events, mentoring young officers, and volunteering throughout Columbus. None of the photographs captured extraordinary moments. They reflected ordinary acts performed consistently over many years. Marcus realized that the investigation which had once connected their lives represented only a few minutes inside a much larger story of public service. When Daniel stepped to the podium, he thanked his family, his colleagues, and the community that had trusted him throughout his career. Then he paused for several quiet seconds before sharing the lesson he hoped every young officer would remember long after his retirement. "The badge never gives you the right to decide the truth before the evidence does," he said calmly. "Your responsibility is not to be the fastest person in the room. Your responsibility is to be the most faithful to the facts." The audience remained completely silent, allowing every word to settle naturally. After the ceremony, several new officers approached Daniel to thank him for the guidance he had provided during their academy training. One recruit admitted that every time she responded to a call involving uncertainty, she remembered the lesson about waiting until every piece of information had been collected before forming conclusions. Another officer explained that the body camera case study had influenced how he communicated with citizens during routine investigations, choosing clear explanations instead of hurried assumptions. Daniel accepted each compliment with quiet humility, reminding them that professionalism was measured one decision at a time rather than through public recognition. Marcus spent much of the afternoon speaking with community members who remembered the department store incident. Many confessed that they had originally believed the shortened videos because they had never imagined how much context could disappear when only a few seconds were shared online. They thanked Marcus for demonstrating patience during a situation that could easily have become divided by misunderstanding. Marcus responded with the same message he had carried ever since that afternoon. "Patience does not erase mistakes," he said. "It gives the truth enough room to correct them." Before leaving the auditorium, the police chief presented Daniel with a simple wooden plaque engraved with a sentence chosen by officers throughout the department. It read, "Integrity is the courage to wait for the whole story." Daniel smiled quietly as he read the inscription, recognizing that it described not only his career, but also the lesson that had continued reaching people far beyond the city where it began. As the evening sunlight streamed through the large windows overlooking downtown Columbus, Daniel and Marcus walked together toward the building in trance one final time. Their paths would soon lead in different directions, yet both understood that the most important legacy of their shared experience was never the investigation itself. The real legacy lived inside every person who chose to pause before judging, to listen before deciding, and to remember that justice is strongest when it begins with humility and ends with the complete truth. 5 years later, the department store where everything had begun looked almost exactly the same, yet the people passing through its entrance had no idea that one ordinary afternoon had quietly reshaped the way an entire community understood fairness, patience, and truth. Families carried shopping bags beneath bright storefront lights. Children laughed while chasing one another across the plaza, and employees greeted customers without remembering the technical error that had once drawn so much unwanted attention. Time had softened the headlines, but it had never erased the lesson. Daniel Hayes, now fully retired, visited the shopping center only occasionally. On one peaceful autumn afternoon, he stopped for a cup of coffee before meeting former colleagues for lunch. His badge had long since been placed inside a small display case at home, yet the habits formed over 30 years of service remained unchanged. He still observed quietly, greeted strangers with respect, and listened more than he spoke. As he walked past the department store entrance, he noticed a familiar face stepping out with several shopping bags. Marcus Reed recognized him at almost the same moment. Both men smiled naturally before shaking hands once again, not because they were remembering a difficult day, but because they had come to appreciate everything that had grown from it. Marcus shared that his technology company had expanded into several neighboring states, creating internship programs for students interested in business and digital innovation. Daniel explained that retirement had become busier than expected because he continued volunteering at local schools and mentoring young officers whenever departments invited him to speak. They laughed softly at how life often carried people toward opportunities they never expected. As they stood near the same entrance where crowds had once gathered with phones raised high, a young couple nearby accidentally dropped several shopping bags across the sidewalk. Without hesitation, Daniel and Marcus stepped forward together to help collect the scattered items. The couple thanked them, never realizing the quiet history shared between the two men standing beside them. It was an ordinary act, unnoticed by everyone except those directly involved, and somehow that made it even more meaningful. Before saying goodbye, Marcus looked around the busy plaza where strangers continued walking in every direction. "Do you ever think about that afternoon anymore?" he asked with a thoughtful smile. Daniel looked toward the storefront for a brief moment before answering. "Not because of what happened," he replied. "I remember it because of what people chose to learn afterward." Marcus nodded in agreement. The event that had once seemed defined by misunderstanding had ultimately become defined by growth. Procedures improved. Training evolved. Students learned to question first impressions. Officers learned to communicate more clearly. Citizens learned that a complete timeline matters more than a brief recording. None of those changes appeared overnight, yet together they created something stronger than a single investigation could ever accomplish. As the afternoon sun settled lower across the Columbus skyline, Daniel and Marcus walked away in different directions for what would likely be the final time. Neither looked back because neither needed to. The truth they had protected years earlier no longer belonged only to them. It belonged to every person willing to pause before judging, every professional willing to wait before deciding, and every community willing to believe that dignity grows strongest when fairness comes before assumption. In the end, the forgotten camera never became the hero of the story. It simply gave the truth enough time to be seen, proving that while opinions may race ahead, justice always arrives with every missing piece. And when the whole story is finally told, character will always speak louder than the first impression.